brought the dead to him, not sick, not weak, not barely breathing, dead. Bodies that had already been given up on. People whose stories had ended. People whose names were already being spoken in past tense. And yet, somehow, there were whispers, stories spreading like wildfire through towns and villages. Stories that said, if this man prayed, something happened, something impossible. This is not a story built on comfort. This is not a story designed to make you feel safe. This is the story of a man whose faith refused to stay within the limits of logic. A man who walked into places filled with disease, fear, and death, and acted like none of it had authority over him. A man named John G. Lake. Long before crowds followed him, before testimonies spread, before his name carried weight, there was a boy who knew pain intimately. John wasn't born into ease. He did not grow up surrounded by comfort or stability. His early life was marked by something many try to avoid but cannot escape: suffering. Illness was not rare in his family. It was constant. It lingered in the air like something unseen but always present. It moved from one person to another, leaving weakness, fear, and sometimes death in its wake. He watched as those closest to him suffered. He saw strength fade from people he loved. He saw hope slowly replaced by silence. And for a young boy, that does something to the mind. It forces questions. Deep, uncomfortable questions. If God is real, why does he allow this? If God is powerful, why doesn't he stop it? If God is good, why does pain seem so close? But instead of turning away, John leaned in. Not because he understood everything, but because something inside him refused to let go of the idea that there had to be more. As he grew older, life began to change on the outside. He stepped into business. Opportunities began to open. He showed intelligence, discipline, and drive. And slowly, success followed. Money came in. Influence grew. Doors that once seemed locked suddenly opened. From the outside, it looked like he had made it. But success can be deceptive. Because while everything around him improved, something inside him remained unsettled. There was a restlessness he could not explain. A sense that no matter how much he gained, it was not enough. And then life struck him again. Not in a small way, not in a manageable way, but in a way that shook him to his core. His wife became critically ill. This was not something he could ignore, not something he could fix with money or connections, not something he could control. He watched as her strength faded. He listened as doctors tried and failed. He felt the weight of helplessness pressing down on him, and suddenly, everything he had built, everything he had achieved, meant nothing. Because the one thing he needed most, he could not provide. In that moment, John was faced with a reality many try to avoid: that there are situations in life where human ability reaches its limit. And when that happens, you either collapse or you look beyond yourself. John chose to look beyond. Not casually, not out of routine, but out of desperation. The kind of desperation that strips away pride. The kind that removes pretense. The kind that leaves you with nothing but raw, honest need. He turned fully to God. He began to search, to study, to read with intensity, not just reading words, but searching for truth. And as he searched, something began to take shape inside him. A realization, a conviction. He came across a truth that would not let him go, that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. If that was true, then the power that existed before still existed now. Healing was not something that ended with history. It was something that could happen in the present. And with that belief forming inside him, he prayed. Not a weak prayer, not a doubtful prayer, but a bold one, a direct one, a prayer that carried expectation. And then, something happened. His wife recovered. Not slowly, not partially, but completely. And in that moment, something shifted inside him permanently. Because once you witness something that defies explanation, you cannot go back to thinking the same way. This was not coincidence. This was not chance. This was power, real power, and it changed everything. A fire was lit inside him, a fire that would not be extinguished. He began to pray for others. At first, it was simple, then it grew. People came to him, broken, sick, desperate, and many left differently than they came. Word began to spread. Some people were drawn to it, others were skeptical. Some were inspired, others were uncomfortable, because what John was stepping into challenged everything people thought they understood. He was not operating within safe boundaries. He was stepping into something bold. Something that required not just belief, but conviction. And then came a call that would change everything. Africa. At the time, parts of Africa were overwhelmed with disease. This was not ordinary sickness. This was deadly. Plagues moved through communities with speed. Fear was everywhere. Death was constant. It was the kind of place people avoided. The kind of place people warned others about. The kind of place that felt too dangerous. But John saw it differently. He believed that where darkness is greatest, light has the greatest opportunity to shine. So he made a decision. He left comfort behind. He left security behind. He stepped away from everything familiar and walked straight into danger. When he arrived, reality hit hard. The situation was worse than he imagined. People were dying. Families were grieving. The fear controlled everything. But John did not operate in fear. He operated in faith. He began to pray for the sick, not from a distance, not cautiously, but boldly. He touched those others avoided. He stood where others refused to stand. And something began to happen. People began to recover. Stories began to spread. Hope began to rise. But not everyone believed. Some watched with suspicion, others with curiosity, and some with determination to prove him wrong. So they decided to test him. Doctors exposed him to infected material, something dangerous, something that should have made him sick. But John did not hesitate. He made a statement that sounded impossible. He said no germ would live in his body. To many, that sounded like madness. But to him, it was conviction. They observed. They tested. And what they reported shocked them. The germs died. Now, whether someone believes that account or not, the truth remains. His faith operated at a level what most people never reach. He did not just believe in God, he believed God. And that difference changes everything. His influence grew. Crowds gathered. People traveled long distances, not just for healing, but for hope. And in many cases, they found both. Entire communities began to change. Fear began to lose its grip. Hope began to take its place. But with influence comes pressure, and with power comes opposition. Critics grew louder, questions increased, accusations followed. Some said it was real, others said it was not. But through it all, John remained focused, not on opinions, but on purpose, because he understood something many miss, that faith is not about approval, it is about alignment. And even in moments where things were not perfect, he continued. Because faith is not performance, it is relationship. There were moments of challenge, moments where things did not happen as expected, moments where silence felt heavy. But he did not step back. He did not retreat. He stayed grounded, grounded in the belief that God is not distant, that God is not powerless, and that God is not finished. His life became a message, not just in words, but in action. A message that faith is meant to be lived, not just spoken. That belief is meant to be bold, not hidden. That purpose requires courage, not comfort. And his story did not end in silence. It continued to echo through the lives he touched, through the faith he inspired, through the conversations he started. Because stories like this do something. They challenge, they provoke, they awaken, they force you to ask questions. Not about him, but about yourself. What do you believe? Not what you say, but what you truly believe. Because belief is not measured in words. It is revealed in action, in moments of pressure, in moments of uncertainty, in moments where logic says one thing and faith says another. John G. Lake lived in that tension, between what was seen and what was believed, between what was possible and what seemed impossible. And he chose to believe, fully, boldly, without hesitation. And that choice changed everything. So now the question is not just about his life, it is about yours. What would happen if you believed like that? What would change if your faith was not hesitant, but certain? What would shift if you stopped limiting what God can do based on what you have seen before? Because the truth is, most people live within boundaries they never question. They accept limits they never examine. They settle into patterns that feel safe. But stories like this disrupt that. They challenge comfort. They challenge assumption. They challenge limitation. And they invite something deeper, something stronger, something real. If this stirred something in you, do not ignore it. Because moments like this are not accidental. They are invitations. Invitations to grow, to stretch, to believe differently. There are still stories that have not been told. Still lives that have not been highlighted. Still examples of faith that the world has overlooked, but heaven has not. Subscribe to Graceful Guidance. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that faith is still powerful, because the next story might not just inspire you, it might transform you.